The anime begins with showing a young boy named Mahiru mourning next to his mom's altar. At the same time, Mahiru's family talks about what will happen to him in the future. They discuss who will take care of Mahiru from now on. At that moment, Mahiru's uncle, named Hirota, decides to take care of him and says he'll live with him. However, Hirota has a job that requires him to work abroad, so he rarely comes home. Still, Mahiru appreciates his uncle's kindness and sees him as a role model. As Mahiru grows up and goes to high school, he starts imitating some of his uncle's characteristics in some ways. One day after school, Mahiru finds a stray cat, takes care of it, and brings it home. After that, he gives the cat a necklace and names it Kuro. The following day, during a school meeting led by the student president, they discuss costumes for an upcoming event. At that moment, Mahiru brings homemade cakes to share with his friends at the meeting, and everyone eagerly tries the cakes. Shortly after, Mahiru and his friends leave together. Along the way, they talk about Mahiru doing a lot for class activities, which making him overwhelmed. However, Mahiru explains that he helps because he enjoys it, even though it can be stressful. Upon hearing this, his friends are confused but promise to help him when he needs it. After that, Sakuya warns Mahiru about vampires in the city center, but Mahiru and the others don't take it seriously. Mahiru then leaves early to do his laundry at home. When Mahiru gets home, he hears the news on TV and goes to check. At that moment, he sees a boy eating ramen while watching TV at his home. Surprised, Mahiru attacks the boy and the boy dodges. When he accidentally pulls the curtain, the boy suddenly turns into Kuro. Mahiru is shocked and tries to push Kuro out the window, but Kuro reveals that he's a vampire and cannot be exposed to sunlight. At that moment, Kuro plans to leave at night and asks Mahiru not to mention his name. But Mahiru accidentally says Kuro's name, binding them together for 24 hours. After that, Kuro asks about Mahiru's parents, and Mahiru tells him his mom died in an accident, and currently he lives with his uncle. Upon hearing this, Kuro understands why Mahiru had picked him up, and he felt that Mahiru was foolish to do something burdensome. Later, Mahiru introduces Kuro to his friends, except for Sakuya. Mahiru tells Kyoki and Ryushi that Kuro is a vampire, but they think he's just tired and saying strange things. At that moment, Mahiru tries to convince them by saying that Sakuya was telling the truth. Shortly after, a strange man appeared, holding many swords in front of Mahiru and his friends. This man, named Belkia, was a subclass under someone named Tsubaki. Belkia acted strangely and childishly during the fight. He then used magical cards to turn into a puppet and attack. At the same time, his master Tsubaki, a Servamp, came to defeat Kuro and Mahiru. Belkia then went after Ryushi, biting his neck until he passed out. People panicked and ran away, including Kuro, whom Mahiru chased. Mahiru asked Kuro for help with Ryushi, but Kuro refused, saying it was too much trouble. Mahiru then decided to stop Belkia alone, but he was struggling until Kuro stepped in, sacrificing himself to save Mahiru from Belkia's sword. At that moment, Kuro told Mahiru to leave with his friends, but Mahiru refused. Instead, Mahiru made a contract with Kuro while offering his blood. After drinking Mahiru's blood, they became bound by a contract, with Mahiru as the Eve or the Master and Kuro as the Servamp, or a vampire servant. After that, Kuro defeated Belkia. But Mahiru stopped Kuro from killing him, asking him to come to his senses. Later, they questioned Belkia to find out why he attacked vampires like Kuro. Where Belkia had explained that his master was Tsubaki, and he disliked lazy vampires like Kuro. Shortly after, Belkia transformed into a puppet. After that, Mahiru and Kuro sat down on the ground from exhaustion. Later, the police inspected the area, while Tsubaki watched from a high place, feeling sad about Belkia's defeat. The next day, Mahiru woke up and found Kuro turned into a cat. Remembering Ryushi's situation, Mahiru hurried to school. Upon arriving in class, Mahiru greeted Sakuya and asked about Ryushi. At the same time, Ryushi and Kuyuki came in, making Mahiru look worried. Mahiru then asked Ryushi about the mark on his neck, where Ryushi explained that the injury was from a car accident, but Mahiru denied it and explained that it was from vampires. However, his friends didn't believe him and thought he was now similar like Sakuya, that afraid vampires. When he returned home from school, Mahiru was very upset and didn't understand what happened to Ryushi. Mahiru then asked Kuro and Belkia to explain what really happened. At the same time, people found it strange to see Mahiru talking to a cat and a puppet. After a while, Mahiru found himself trapped in a blood wall and saw Tsubaki, where he introduced himself as the 8th vampire, and he was the youngest sibling. Despite the fact that there should only be 7 vampires according to the melancholic sins, at that moment, Tsubaki had a psychopathic and unstable personality, as he had a desire to kill everyone who didn't know him. His motives and past were very unclear, but Tsubaki had a close relationship with the person who created vampires, whom he called his master. However, Tsubaki truly cared for every subclass or contract servant, and he would never betray them. Tsubaki's animal form was a fox with his main weapon was katana. Additionally, Tsubaki explained that Kuro was considered to be the strongest among them, which contradicted to his lazy personality. All this time, Kuro was the only vampire without a subclass because he disliked troublesome things. Tsubaki then recounted the 7 siblings who became vampires, and mentioned that he was the last descendant vampire with the nickname "Who is Coming." After that, Tsubaki launched an attack on Kuro, seeking revenge because he had been neglected by his sibling for a long time. However, Mahiru saved Kuro and tried to change Tsubaki's crazy mind. Mahiru then recalled when he was a child, how his uncle gave him encouragement and affection, allowing Mahiru to open his heart to others, especially when with friends. During the argument between Mahiru and Tsubaki, a light appeared to save Mahiru and Kuro, while Tsubaki left with Belkia, leaving the place. Shortly after, Mahiru and Kuro found themselves stranded in a seemingly endless corridor, where Kuro told Mahiru that other vampires had saved them. Shortly after, a boy named Mizuno appeared. He was a high school student in the same year as Mahiru. At that moment, Mizuno said that he was the Eve of all of love named Li. Upon arriving at Mizuno's residence, he appeared very tired and then rested. Mahiru scolded Mizuno for always resting anywhere. Shortly after, Li introduced himself as the youngest vampire among the 8 known vampires, and fitting the sin of lust. Li had a highly romantic nature when it came to love. For several generations, Li had served Mizuno's family alongside Dop, the vampire, from the next Eve. Following that, Mizuno commanded Li to attack Mahiru and Kuro. Mizuno then asked Mahiru to serve him and follow his orders. Mizuno was disappointed with Mahiru's lack of strength when confronting Tsubaki. However, Mizuno's actions angered Mahiru and led Kuro to consider leaving the house. Shortly after, Mahiru got lost and looked around the house, where Mahiru and Kuro saw a group of children in each room in Mizuno's residence. At first, Mahiru thought the children were Li's, but Li explained that the children were his subclasses. In the past, Tsubaki's vampires targeted the children, so Lily took care of them and made them his subclasses. Mizuno also recounted Tsubaki's cruelty to Mahiru, which making Mahiru realize that Mizuno really wanted to protect the children. Therefore, Mahiru decided to help Mizuno as a friend, not a servant. Mizuno also said that he would teach Mahiru to use weapons against other vampires. Mizuno explained that an Eve should have a weapon along with their vampire. Therefore, Mizuno would guide Mahiru to learn about the lists of vampires for the future. After that, Mahiru went to the supermarket and met Sakuya, where Sakuya said that if Mahiru kept a black cat, it would bring him bad luck in the future. However, Mahiru asked Sakuya not to worry about it, because Kuro was just an obedient ordinary cat. After they finished shopping, Mahiru and Sakuya walked home together. At that moment, Sakuya asked if Mahiru was keeping something from him, because he had been acting oddly lately. Mahiru hesitated for a moment before saying he was okay, but Sakuya seemed uneasy and said goodbye to Mahiru first. On the way, Sakuya was attacked by a strange shadow from behind. Switching to Mahiru, who was with Mizuno, they were discussing the suitable weapon for Mahiru. However, weapons could only be created by vampires, and Kuro was very lazy and disliked getting involved in troublesome matters. Upon knowing this, Mizuno scolded Kuro to create a weapon for Mahiru. Suddenly, another figure appeared inside Kuro's body, leading Mahiru to see a pile of gifts. If Mahiru chose something right, it would be useful for him. However, the gifts couldn't be returned to their original place. After choosing one from the pile of gifts, Mahiru got Kuro's magical broom. Upon seeing this, Kuro remembered the first time he was discovered by Mahiru after he transformed. At that moment, Mahiru attacked him with a broom. so the magical weapon that appeared was a broom. On the other hand, Tsubaki was with Belkia at a Japanese restaurant, where Belkia asked if his subclass would come as promised, and Tsubaki also believed that the man would come. Shortly after, Tsubaki's suspicion was correct as a man approached them in the restaurant, and even more surprisingly, Sakuya was a vampire and he had a victim in his hand. Upon seeing this, Tsubaki warned Sakuya about his identity as a vampire, because Sakuya was a high school student and had many friends. Meanwhile, Mahiru was practicing using a secret vampire weapon, but Mahiru couldn't summon his weapon to come out of his hand. Realizing that Kuro was very lazy, Mahiru consulted with Mizuno and Lily, where Lily advised Mahiru to awaken his determination to fight. Upon hearing this, Mahiru quickly thought of his friends and felt a strong urge to protect them. He considered Sakuya and his friends as his close family and decided to introduce them to Mizuno. Mahiru also asked Kuro to join him in defending their loved ones. Kuro casually agreed to follow Mahiru's orders and eliminate anyone who harmed him. However, Mahiru felt unsatisfied seeing Kuro lacking motivation. Shortly after, when it was time for Mizuno to sleep and rest, Lily asked Mahiru and Kuro to visit the next day and continue their training. Several days later at school, Mahiru and his friends were worried about Sakuya, who had been skipping school for days. Mahiru then told Ryushi that he would visit him after school. After school, Mahiru went to the convenience store to buy some food to give to Sakuya. Along the way, Mahiru began to wonder where Sakuya's house was, even though they were childhood friends and Sakuya experienced the same things as Mahiru. Shortly after, Sakuya appeared in front of Mahiru and took Mahiru somewhere. At that moment, Sakuya turned cold and scolded Mahiru, saying that the area was dangerous because he had warned Mahiru that vampires had attacked the city. After that, Mahiru and Kuro were then trapped in nets together. Shortly after, Belkia showed up and stood beside Sakuya. Seeing this, Kuro mentioned that Sakuya was a subordinate of Tsubaki. Then Sakuya and Belkia attacked Kuro, causing him harm. Mahiru offered to give his blood to Kuro, but it was too late. Kuro explained that without Mahiru's determination in fighting, he couldn't gain strength. As Mahiru found himself trapped, Mizuno and Lily arrived to assist. Lily employed his skills to defeat Belkia, while Mizuno confronted Sakuya. Mizuno declared that he would battle Sakuya on behalf of Mahiru. Sadly, Mahiru's plan to introduce Sakuya to Mizuno was thwarted when it turned out that Sakuya was their adversary. Initially, Mizuno and Lily had the upper hand in defeating Belkia, but Sakuya locked Mizuno's head until he lost consciousness. Sakuya then challenged Mahiru to fight him. However, Kuro urged Mahiru to leave because they would lose if they fought. But Mahiru said he would fight Sakuya to make him regain consciousness. Finally, Mahiru was able to summon his weapon and would confront Sakuya's attack, where Sakuya looked serious about fighting Mahiru. Meanwhile, on top of the building, there was a girl named Giri who kept watching them. She was a woman who became a subclass of Tsubaki. Giri wore nurse clothes and had a special power to use strings to tie up her enemies. She also controlled a puppet to attack, and Giri had a habit of finding unexpected things troublesome. Shortly after, Tsubaki came to monitor Mahiru's fight against Sakuya. Meanwhile, in the arena, Mahiru was able to attack Sakuya with his weapon, causing him to bleed. At that moment, Sakuya seemed to enjoy fighting his friend. Sakuya also erased false memories from Mahiru and attacked him, hoping Mahiru would end his life. After that, Mahiru continued to attack Sakuya relentlessly, but he refused to kill him and instead promised to free him from Tsubaki's control. At the same time, within Kuro, a dark shadow emerged. The shadow immediately blamed Kuro for polluting Mahiru's innocent attitude. The shadow also said that whenever Kuro did something, the world would become unlucky. Kuro then sucked Mahiru's blood and became extremely aggressive, and the dark shadow's figure was intense and dominated the battleground. Upon seeing this, Mahiru was frightened by Kuro's transformation, and Mahiru tried to make Kuro regain consciousness from that dangerous power. Shortly after, Sakuya came to save Mahiru from the shadow's power, where Sakuya asked Mahiru to order Kuro to kill him immediately. However, Yuri advised Sakuya against wanting to save Mahiru, but Sakuya didn't care and intended to save his valuable friend. During the battle, a man named Mikuni showed up. He was Mizuno's older brother and worked as an antique dealer. Mikuni might seem childish, but in reality, he was clever, manipulative, and didn't hesitate to kill. Mikuni then asked his subclass named JJ to stop Kuro's power. Dop or JJ is the third oldest vampire and corresponds to the sin of envy. He has a jealous yet quiet personality and often mutters when speaking. At the same time, Mizuno's car arrived, where Lily bid farewell to Mahiru and took Mizuno to the hospital. Meanwhile, Sakuya retreated with Yuri, leaving Mahiru. After that, Mikuni greeted Mahiru and handed Kuro that was injured after JJ managed to stop him from the dark rampage. Mikuni then told Mahiru that he would teach him how to break the vampire contract and asked Mahiru to become a regular student like before. If Mahiru was interested, Mikuni would teach him how to remove the contract with Kuro. Upon hearing this, Mahiru felt puzzled about who Mikuni really was, and only explained that he was an antique dealer. After that, Mikuni left with JJ. Several days later, Kuro thought Mahiru regretted picking him up, so Kuro distanced himself from Mahiru. After that, Mahiru left the house and saw Tsubaki in the restaurant. Mahiru then approached Tsubaki and asked how Sakuya could become his servant. Tsubaki then recounted that Sakuya was a liar, as the first person to lie to Sakuya was his sister. In the past, Sakuya's sister said that their father would come home late at night. When her father returning, Sakuya's sister was forced to do the unthinkable by jumping from their apartment. At that moment, Sakuya witnessed the accident and intended to follow his sister. However, their father threatened Sakuya and asked him to provide false testimony to the police. And for the first time, Sakuya lied and gave false testimony. After that, Sakuya's parents received a large sum of insurance money for his sister's death. 6 years later, Sakuya followed his sister's path and jumped from the apartment. However, Tsubaki came to save Sakuya when he was in critical condition. It turns out, a subclass is created when a person who dies drinks vampire blood. After that subclass must obey their master's orders. Upon hearing this, Mahiru was deeply affected, knowing that Sakuya lived in sadness, so Mahiru was determined to save Sakuya from Tsubaki. Mahiru then recalled his memories with Sakuya when they were in school together, where Sakuya's genuine smile remained in his memory. After that, Mahiru went to school to find Sakuya's whereabouts. However, his friends said that Sakuya had transferred schools. After hearing this, Mahiru was determined to reunite with Sakuya as they were before. He then asked his friends to wait because he would bring Sakuya back. Several days later, the school festival began. Sakuya apparently sneaked in wearing a mask and saw Ryushi with his friends. Unexpectedly, Mahiru threw Kuro at Sakuya's face and chased after him. After that, Sakuya immediately fled and asked Mahiru not to chase him anymore. He explained that he had attacked Mizuno and had become his enemy. However, Mahiru asked Sakuya to go visit Mizuno and apologize to him. Sakuya insisted that he was an enemy of both Mahiru and Mizuno, but Mahiru believed that Sakuya was his good friend. Sakuya explained that he created false memories in Mahiru, where they actually met and became friends a year ago. After this, Sakuya couldn't meet Mahiru and his friends again because he wasn't human. Sakuya then jumped off the attic, but was saved by Mahiru using his weapon. In the end, the two landed in the middle of the forest and laughed together. At that moment, Sakuya thanked Mahiru for trying to save him, then asked Mahiru to let him go because he was bound to Tsubaki and had to obey his orders. Upon hearing this, Mahiru said he would fight Tsubaki and save Sakuya, which touched Sakuya, and he left Mahiru. After that, Mahiru then invited Kuro to train together to fight Tsubaki. Shortly after, Sakuya gathered with his members at their headquarters, where Belkia and Giri enjoyed playing mahjong with Tsubaki, but Sakuya looked sad as he stared out the window. Tsubaki then asked his members if their preparations were complete, as Tsubaki intended to launch an attack during the evening festival event. On the other hand, Mahiru invited Kuro to go to the festival event to see the fireworks. However, Kuro immediately went to try the snacks available at the festival. Shortly after, a man handed a suitcase to Mahiru and asked him to deliver the suitcase to its owner. The man was Samrock, and he was a subclass of Tsubaki, who always addressed his master as young master. Shortly after, Mahiru left Kuro behind and went to deliver the suitcase. He searched for a place to report the lost item, but on his way, he met a man named Tatsu who was looking for someone. Tatsu was a middle school student who worked at a hot spring and he was tended to be very gentle and simple-minded. Although Tatsu was still a middle school student, he had a tall and big stature, leading people to mistake him for a college student. Tatsu didn't seem bothered at all about being tied to a vampire, because he always carried his weapon, which a huge coffin that couldn't be destroyed. In fact, he used the coffin to promote his family's hot spring, because Tatsu didn't know how to get rid of it. Mahiru then invited Tatsu to look for a loudspeaker to announce the suitcase to the people at the festival. Suddenly, there was an explosion, and Mahiru became extremely panicked. At that moment, Mahiru realized that the contents of the suitcase were a bomb. Mahiru then asked Kuro to bite it, and they would release the suitcase. However, the suitcase was taken by Tatsu, and he put the bomb into the coffin he was carrying. In the end, the incident was stopped, but Tatsu's vampire companion grumbled because he was inside the coffin. The vampire named Hawk, and he was the eldest among 8 vampire siblings, despite his small size of only 2.6 inches. True to his sin of pride, Hawk exhibited a childish sense of pride, openly admitting that Tatsu's blood was truly delicious. After that, Mahiru and his friends gathered together while enjoying snacks. Warhawk then told Mahiru about his first encounter with Tatsu and introduced Tatsu's weapon as a coffin. However, Tatsu didn't know how to use it, so he advertised on the coffin to attract customers. Following that, Mahiru was surprised to discover that Tatsu was only 14 years old despite his tall height. Hawk explained that the festival explosion was caused by Tsubaki. Therefore, Hawk invited Mahiru to team up and defeat Tsubaki. Afterward, Mahiru and Kuro bid farewell and headed home. But on the way, Mahiru was kidnapped while Kuro was captured by other vampires. Mahiru was greeted by a man named Sohei from inside the room. He is a member of the C3 research team. Sohei had apparently harbored a deep hate for vampires after his father, also a member of C3, was killed by Samrock, one of Tsubaki's subclass. Therefore, Sohei initially wanted to be on the combat team, but his poor fighting style forced him to stay on the research team. When Sohei was still in high school, he was a junior of Mikuni, and the two of them didn't get along. After hearing this, Mahiru rejected Sohei's invitation because his plan would endanger Sakuya in the future. When Mahiru intended to leave the room, but he got trapped in the room which had 52 doors. At the same time, Kuro was being chased by a man named Surui, who was one of the strongest C3 members from the combat team. Surui was feared among vampires for ruthlessly killing many of their kind. He enjoyed these actions, having been born and raised in C3 under the guidance of the C3 Tokyo branch vice manager. Although Surui was cruel and even sadistic in killing his enemies, he was cheerful and childish around others. After that, Surui along with his 2 friends attacked Kuro, who was trying to escape. Surui warned Kuro that if he stayed away from his Eve, it would be dangerous for Mahiru's life. Meanwhile, Mahiru was confused about how to get out of the room, worrying about Kuro who was being hunted by Surui. But with determination, Mahiru broke through the roof of the room until it collapsed. Mahiru then told Sohei that whether it's C3 or vampires, as long as they are friends, he will help them. After that, Mahiru flew with his magic broom and picked up Kuro, where they managed to escape from the C3 members. Sohei then contacted his colleagues and asked them to stop the mission. After the incident, Mahiru gathered his friends to stay at Tatsu's family hot spring resort, where Kuro and Lily relaxed in Tatsu's family hot spring bath. Similarly, Mizuno enjoyed the lodging room provided by Tatsu. While Tatsu was busy welcoming the guests, Mahiru complained to his friends who were not taking their next mission seriously. At that moment, Hawk informed Mahiru that there was a mysterious newcomer in the city. After that, Mahiru and Kuro followed the footsteps of the mysterious individuals and kept surveillance on them. Mahiru was assisted by Hawk's subclasses that scattered everywhere. However, Mahiru felt that Kuro was very mysterious and unwilling to discuss his past, but he waited for Kuro to open up to him eventually. Not long after, the mysterious man began to distance himself and Mahiru hurried to pursue him. The man's name was Lawless. He was the 5th youngest vampire, bound by a contract with Lich. Due to his sin of greed, Lawless was very unstable because he had no interest in human life values. Lawless tended to brutally slaughter anyone who stood in his way. He even had the habit of killing his employers if he became bored with them. After that, Mahiru was caught following Lawless, so he brutally attacked Kuro. Luckily, Mahiru came to rescue Kuro, allowing them to fight back. After the fight, Lawless introduced his Eve Lich to Mahiru and Kuro, Lich was a famous Austrian pianist known worldwide for his eccentric personality, and he seemed to consider himself an angel. Lich was very harsh and often attacked other vampires. As a result, Lich was considered a cruel demon. He developed also a strong hatred towards Lawless, whom he often insulted as a stinky hedgehog, and enjoyed tormenting him. Lich had two weapons, a pair of tough boots that could slow down other vampires' healing abilities when he kicked them, and a grand piano that could play different tunes and weaken enemies when they heard it. After that, Mahiru invited Lich and Lawless to work with them to defeat Tsubaki. However, both of them refused and immediately left the place. Not long after, Lich was going to hold a piano concert, and he was preparing for it. Mahiru then spied on the hotel where the concert was being held. However, Mahiru didn't have a ticket, so he didn't dare to enter. But suddenly, a man named Rosen approached him and invited Mahiru to see Lich's concert. Upon arriving at the venue, Mahiru realized that Tsubaki's subclass would attack Lich's concert. Knowing this, Mahiru hurried to save him. But upon arriving at the hall, Mahiru saw the vampires who had been brutally killed because Lawless had already eliminated them. After that, Lich and Lawless fought until their master was slammed into the wall, where Mahiru scolded Lawless for his brutal behavior towards his Eve. But Lawless was disgusted by Mahiru's naivety and attacked him. Kuro immediately intercepted the attack and Mahiru was saved. Unexpectedly, Lawless recounted Kuro's dark past, as Mahiru was unaware of the cruelty of the first brother of the vampires. In the past, the 7 vampire siblings received a letter revealing that Kuro had clashed with Lawless because he decided to kill the person who made them vampires after receiving a request from C3. Lawless accepted the request because he believed that the world didn't need monsters like them anymore. Kuro also followed through and killed their creator, but it weighed heavily on him, causing feelings of regret. This remorse and sadness led him to refrain from taking action unless instructed to do so, until Mahiru encouraged him to confront his past mistakes. This also greatly strengthened their friendship. As Lawless told his story, Kuro became furious and they began to fight each other. Mahiru attempted to stop the conflict between the vampire brothers, but Lich attacked all 3 of them with his piano music. This made Mahiru and the others cry, recalling their dark pasts. Soon after, Rosen arrived with a guest and requested their intervention. The guest managed to resolve the disagreement among the 4 of them. Afterward, Lawless noticed a woman, one of Tsubaki's subclasses, left behind in the hall. Lawless intended to kill her, but was stopped by Mahiru. Lawless was annoyed and immediately left the arena. The woman was Lilac, and she would join Mahiru for the time being. After that, Lawless felt a strange feeling when he saw Tsubaki approaching him. Tsubaki's aura was very dark when he saw Lawless, and he intended to avenge his subclass. Shortly after, Mahiru brought Lilac to Tatsu's inn, where they talked about her future. Mahiru then advised his friends not to act recklessly, as he believed that Tsubaki would rescue Lilac, since he was very loyal to his subordinates. As he remembered when Tsubaki saved Belkia from him, but suddenly Kuro became strange and Mahiru chased after him. Suddenly a dark aura rose from Kuro's body, making Mahiru afraid. Mahiru then asked Kuro to turn back into a cat and Mahiru took him home. That night, Mahiru approached Lilac, who was lost in thought. Lilac asked why Mahiru saved her from Lawless. Mahiru said that he didn't actually want to fight, but the situation forced the Eves to do so. Actually, Mahiru also didn't want to confront Tsubaki, but he wanted to save Sakuya. Upon hearing this, Lilac then warned Mahiru not to confront a subclass named Higun. The next day, Mahiru was called by Rosen and asked about Lawless's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Lich's condition was critical because he was far from his vampire. Unexpectedly, Lich was confronted by Tsubaki's subclass named Higun, who is the second strongest subclass of Tsubaki. He has the ability to create fire from his hands and ignite fire from scratches made on the opponent's body. After drinking human blood, Higun reverts to a much younger appearance and greatly boosts his strength. Higun also declared that he would confront Lich for upsetting Tsubaki. Meanwhile, Lawless had been taken hostage by Tsubaki and was badly injured. However, Lich said he didn't care about Lawless and would beat Higun. From a distance, Mahiru saw the dangerous situation and then approached Lich. Following that, Mahiru instructed Kuro to transform and attack Higun, but instead, Kuro sank into darkness and transformed into a ball. Mahiru was shocked to see Kuro disappear and turn into a ball. Meanwhile, Higun was preparing to attack the injured Mahiru. Luckily, Lich intervened, stating that Higun was his opponent, and used piano rhythm to disrupt Higun's emotions. After that, Higun felt the effects of the attack from the rhythm played by the pianist, thus resulting in a battle between music and fire. But in the end, Higun won the fight. After Lich was defeated, Higun took him away to Tsubuki's headquarters. Meanwhile, Mahiru was simply shocked and unable to take any action. Soon after, Mizuno and the others approached Mahiru. There, Mahiru explained what had happened and expressed deep distress. At that moment, Mizuno tried to calm Mahiru down because they still had a chance. On the other hand, Higun left his phone at the scene, which was found by Mizuno. Not long after, Tsubuki called Higun's phone, and Mizuno answered it. At that moment, Mizuno made an offer to Tsubuki to make an exchange. Initially, Tsubuki refused to exchange Lich and Lawless for a phone belonging to Higun. However, Mizuno explained that he would exchange Lich and Lawless for Lilac. Intrigued by the offer, Tsubuki agreed and Mizuno said he would inform them of the time and place of the exchange. On the other hand, Lawless was bound in a room, and he was curious about Lich's fate, whether he was still alive or dead. In fact, Yves and Servamps shouldn't be far apart, because their masters will die immediately. Shortly after, Mizuno and the others held a meeting at Tatsu's Inn. There, Mizuno asked Mahiru not to get involved in this incident because Mahiru no longer had Kuro and his weapon, so he was asked not to act. Mizuno led the meeting and invited the other friends to discuss their strategy. Then Mahiru looked at the ball and reminisced about his time with Kuro. At that moment, Mahiru regretted not directly asking what Kuro had faced in the past, because Mahiru was afraid to ask, leaving Kuro to lose control. If only Mahiru could understand Kuro, maybe Kuro wouldn't have left. After that, Mahiru cried bitterly, but suddenly Kuro appeared in the ball and spoke to Mahiru. Kuro said that Mahiru was very noisy and disturbed his sleep. Upon hearing this, Mahiru was overjoyed to learn that Kuro was still alive. Mahiru then inquired about how Kuro could escape from the ball, but Kuro didn't know and felt trapped inside. Kuro mentioned that being stuck didn't bother him, as he disliked getting involved with the outside world and doing troublesome things. However, Mahiru reassured Kuro, promising to free him soon. Shortly after, Mahiru showed Mizuno and the others the condition of Kuro, and then Tatsu wanted to split it with a saw. But Mahiru stopped him, saying he would find a way to save Kuro. Not long after, Rosen came looking for the whereabouts of Lich and Lawless. At that moment, Mahiru apologized to Rosen for not being able to protect Lich. After that, Rosen joined the meeting with Mizuno and the others. In the room, Rosen tested the vampire fluid he bought from Hawk, and it turned out to be effective. It turns out, Rosen frequently utilized that fluid to control Lawless's behavior. Mahiru then asked about where Rosen obtained the fluid, and Rosen mentioned getting it from a man who sold antiques. Mahiru then recalled Mikuni and expressed his intention to seek his assistance. However, Mizuno didn't want to involve him and disagreed. Li then asked Mizuno to relent because their situation was dire. After that, Mahiru then started his journey to find Mikuni. Shortly after, Mahiru reached the antique shop and heard a conversation from inside the room. Upon entering, he was surprised to find Mikuni absent, and instead, a man named Johans was attending the store. Johans, a researcher fascinated with studying vampires, admitted to enjoying experimenting on them. Dr. Johans was acquainted with Mikuni and was excited about something new. After that, he asked Mahiru the purpose of looking for Mikuni. While they were talking, Mikuni suddenly entered into the room, screaming in frustration because Dr. Johans had disrupted his store with his wild experiments. Mikuni then greeted Mahiru and introduced himself as Mizuno's brother. Mahiru was very surprised to see the two men, who were very different from each other. After that, Mahiru told them about Kuro being inside the ball. Upon hearing this, Dr. Johans was very interested and took Mahiru into his lab. Mikuni then asked about Mahiru's plans once Kuro was safe. Mahiru replied that he simply wanted Kuro back as his friend and in a safe state. However, the cunning Dr. Johans secretly drugged Mahiru until he lost consciousness, then proceeded to prepare for experiments on Kuro. Meanwhile, Mizuno and the others were in disguise. Rosen disguised himself as a tourist and wanted to book a room, while Mizuno would check each floor and take the elevator. Inside the elevator, Mizuno saw Sakuya and realized their movements. At that moment, Sakuya loudly declared that he wouldn't lie anymore. After that, Mizuno asked Tatsu to go up using the stairs, while he would confront Sakuya along with Lily in the elevator. At the same time, Tsubaki was confronted by Lawless's subclass. However, Tsubaki found it amusing that Lawless's subclass dared to oppose him. Lawless's subclasses said that even though their boss was very annoying, they were responsible for saving him. On the other hand, Mizuno and Lily were confronting Sakuya on the lower floor, where Mizuno remembered Mikuni's words while playing chess and began mocking Sakuya to destabilize him. Mizuno also reminded Sakuya of his friendship with Mahiru. After that, Sakuya lost control and appeared very emotional upon hearing Mahiru's name, and he mentioned that Tsubaki was planning a war among the vampires. Meanwhile, Lawless grumbled in his cell, upset about being imprisoned, and cursed Lich, blaming his master for being captured by Tsubaki. Lich, who was in the neighboring cell, listened to Lawless's complaints and responded. They then argued as they usually did. On the other hand, Mahiru entered Kuro's memories and witnessed the incident between Kuro and Lawless. At that time, Kuro went to the Servamp founder's headquarters, Sleepy Ash, and killed him. Since that incident, Kuro lived in regret and guilt. After that, Mahiru entered another memory of Kuro and tapped into it, urging Kuro to open the door for him. When Mahiru saw Kuro in a state of agony and despair, he told Kuro that he was not guilty and asked him to wake up again. After that, Kuro left his bad memories behind, inspired by Mahiru's spirit. The scene then showed Lawless's past. He lived with a princess in a kingdom. Initially, Lawless was to be killed because he was a vampire. However, the princess named Obelia saved him. After that, Lawless was always with Obelia wherever she went. Obelia became Lawless's Eve, and they made a contract. Obelia liked to help her people and loved peace, until one day, the king decided that Obelia had to marry a prince from a neighboring kingdom. At that time, the two kingdoms were always at war and causing too many casualties. To maintain peace between the two kingdoms, the king made an alliance by marrying the princess to the prince of the neighboring country. Not long after, Obelia conveyed the news of her marriage to Lawless, so he was very sad and wanted to run away with Obelia. Lawless even promised to make Obelia happy and take her far away. However, Obelia rejected him because she would protect her people, and if her marriage brought happiness to her people, then Obelia was willing to sacrifice. After that, Obelia canceled the contract with Lawless and married the prince, leaving Lawless very sad after witnessing Obelia's marriage. Some time passed until one day, Lawless heard that Obelia was going to be sacrificed by the kingdom. Lawless immediately asked Obelia to leave with him so she wouldn't be killed. However, Obelia refused, prioritizing peace, and was willing to sacrifice herself. The next day, the time came for Obelia to be executed. She then delivered her speech to her people, and afterward, Obelia was executed in front of Lawless, leaving him deeply devastated. After a while, the people put up a statue of Princess Obelia, and Lawless always stood watch over it. Suddenly, Hawk approached Lawless with a letter from Sleepy Ash. Hawk then informed Lawless that the 7 vampires would hold an urgent meeting. After that, Lawless attended the meeting and felt deeply disappointed upon hearing Sleepy Ash's decision to kill the creator of the Servamps. Sleepy Ash stated that he killed the leader for the sake of peace. However, Lawless was disgusted with the notion of peace and opposed it, leading to an altercation between both Kuro and Lawless, ending in disappointment. Afterward, Lawless returned to the kingdom and saw destruction everywhere. Both kingdoms were devastated by war, including the statue of Obelia. Because of that, Lawless became cold-hearted. After witnessing Lawless's past, Lich played his piano music to make Lawless realize his mistakes. According to Lich, Lawless was living on the edge of the past and had no purpose in life. Lich would restore Lawless's lost motivation for life. After that, Lich's words made Lawless realize and lament on his mistakes. Lich then made a contract with Lawless, giving him a new name, Hyde. After they reconciled and prepared to confront Higun, a fierce battle ensued between them. Initially, Lich and Hyde were overwhelmed by Higun's immense power. However, Lich did not lose hope and urged Hyde to launch a combined attack to defeat Higun. With Lawless's strength and Lich's piano accompaniment, they finally managed to overpower and defeat Higun. On the other hand, Mizuno had been rescued by Mikuni and GHA, enabling him to catch up to Tatsu. Upon reaching the upper floor, Mizuno saw Tatsu being overwhelmed by 3 subclasses belonging to Tsubaki. Mizuno was puzzled about what to do because their situation was dire. At the same time, Hawk was trapped in Belkia's magic box and vanished instantly. Shortly after, Mahiru arrived with Kuro, who had transformed into a new form as a lion and appeared very powerful. Mahiru then fought the subclasses with Kuro, which successfully incapacitating the enemies. Mahiru then asked about Hawk's condition from Tatsu, who replied that his Servamp was lost, taken by the enemy. Following that, Mahiru requested Kuro to apologize to Hyde, leading to the reconciliation of the 2 vampire brothers. Mahiru then inquired with Tatsu about Lilac's location. When Tatsu brought Lilac out, she promptly took Hyde's necklace. Mahiru remembered that if an item given by an Eve to a Servamp was taken by the enemy, the Servamp would perish instantly. Therefore, Mahiru tried to stop Lilac from acting rashly. However, Lilac vowed to avenge her sibling killed by Hyde. She warned that if Mahiru disagreed, she would have to kill him. At that moment, Mahiru was torn about how to deal with Lilac's extreme actions. Suddenly, Tsubaki appeared and demanded Lilac to give Hyde's necklace. Lilac then obeyed her master and handed over the necklace. Following that, Mahiru asked Tsubaki what had happened to Hawk. Tsubaki explained that Belkia had used his trap to capture Hawk, and he clarified that he started the war to demonstrate this to his mentor, Sleepy Ash. Tsubaki then threw Hyde's necklace and prepared to strike it. As a result, Hyde's body was severely injured by Tsubaki's attack, prompting Kuro to intervene and protect Hyde from further harm. Soon after, a confrontation between the 1st and 8th Servamps began. Tsubaki desired to learn his mentor's last words to Kuro, but Kuro stayed quiet and tried to prevent Tsubaki's reckless behavior. Tsubaki felt let down by his mentor for not involving him in discussions with other vampires. Meanwhile, Mahiru searched for Kuro amidst the mist and came across Mikuni, who seemed very calm. Mikuni encouraged Mahiru not to hesitate in his efforts to save Kuro. Determined to rescue Kuro, Mahiru joined the battle between the 2 brothers. In brief, Mahiru assisted Kuro in confronting Tsubaki's attacks, injuring Tsubaki, who then targeted Mahiru, leading Kuro to transform into a fierce lion. At the same time, Sohei and his team arrived to rescue the vampires and evacuate them. Tatsu then saw Hawk in the ambulance and felt relieved. Returning to the battle, Kuro had lost control and was on the brink of killing Tsubaki. However, Mahiru begged Kuro not to harm his brother. Despite losing control, Kuro attacked Mahiru, but Sakuya came to Mahiru's aid and turned against Tsubaki. Witnessing Sakuya injured deeply shocked Mahiru, prompting him to confront Tsubaki and unlock the seal on his chest. Following that, Mahiru witnessed Tsubaki's darker side emerging within himself. It became apparent that Tsubaki was deeply grieved by the loss of his mentor, who was killed by Kuro. Tsubaki swore to avenge his mentor's death by killing Kuro. At the same time, Tsubaki viciously attacked Mahiru. However, Kuro intervened, and together they launched a joint assault, almost causing Tsubaki to fall from the building. However, Mahiru embraced Tsubaki and rescued him, ultimately softening Tsubaki's heart with his compassionate action. Following this, Mahiru reunited with Mizuno and the rest of the group. Meanwhile, Tsubaki healed Sakuya's injuries and released him from his role as a subclass. Tsubaki then advised Sakuya to allow the other subclasses to live freely and follow their own desires. The following day, Mahiru went back to school and reunited with Ryushi and the rest of the group. Together with Kuro, they began their new life, which appeared very joyful, and the story came to an end. The moral lesson from the story is, never turn your coffin into a fireworks display, especially if your vampire friend is sleeping inside during the day. Instead, use the coffin to promote your family's hot spring.